Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to this second lesson for this series. We're talking about music theory. If you were there last week, that's great. And if you were not, you can always rewatch that video. They're all hosted on the website, so you can do that too. And if you haven't seen the first video, stick with us anyways because you'll probably be able to catch up and watch that first video later on. So I'm glad you're here. We're talking about music theory, not because we want to change the way we play necessarily, but just because I want to give you the tools to understand what's going on in your playing, and that's most likely going to unlock some stumbling blocks that you might have in your playing. So if you're writing a song and you're not sure what should come next, what options you have, you're going to get the answer in this course. Or if you are asked to record a solo over a backing track or a chord progression that someone recorded or that you recorded too, and you're not quite sure which scale to use, this course is also made for you. So music theory is just going to help you unlock some things. And again, it's not going to rob you from your musicality. On the contrary, it's going to give you more options. You're not going to lose yourself by knowing all these theory concepts. You're really not. You're still going to remain who you are. It's just going to give you more options. Last week, we talked about a fundamental difference between major intervals and minor intervals. So, quick reminder, an interval is basically the distance between two notes. That's how you're measuring the distance between two notes. And the reason why it's important is that without that difference between two notes, without that distance, then there's no real music. Music is all about intervals. If we didn't have intervals, we'd just have sounds. No pitches and no melodic ideas, no chords. So we really need to understand what intervals are. And
Dave, sorry to interrupt.
yeah, no problem.
Just want to make an announcement real quick. If you're having trouble getting on the chat on JamPlay through JamChat, remember you can use the chat on live stream. You'll have to log into live stream and then you can ask any questions and communicate through that. All right, back to you, Dave.
Yeah, thanks. Speaking of the chat, if you have questions, don't hesitate to write them down. I'll pause throughout the lesson every once in a while to get some of these questions and answer them. And at the end of the session, there'll be a time slot too that will allow us to just kind of go back and forth and talk about all these things. But don't hesitate as the lesson goes on to ask your questions and take notes too. That might be beneficial. And today it's going to be more hands-on, so grab your guitar too, and we're going to talk about those things. So again, intervals, the distance between two notes. And last week we talked about a very important interval, which is the third. And we talked about the difference between major thirds and minor thirds. Today we're going to go a little bit more in depth. And I told you last week that any interval can be major or minor. And I also told you that was a very general statement that was not necessarily true. Today we're going to know why. But yeah, we're going to dive in right away with these intervals. One thing that you should know is that in order to have an interval, we need to have a starting point. The starting point is the note from which we're going to measure all the other notes. Without a starting point, we don't have an interval. An interval needs to have two notes. That first note, that starting point, is called the root, and it's from that note that we're going to measure all the other intervals. And the wider the interval, the bigger the number it's going to have. So that first note from which we're measuring all the others is not an interval. That's the starting point, and that's the root, or 1, number 1. And as we go on the fretboard, as we get wider and wider, we'll have wider and wider intervals. So let's consider this note, which is the open string, as a root. So I am going to play the low E string, open string. That's going to be my reference point. That's a 0. If I go up, that's 1 interval. And if I keep going up, the intervals get wider and wider. All the way up, so I'm going to have 0, or the root, a second interval, That's the small interval, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh, an eighth, and the eighth is very special. It's called the octave. The reason why it's special is because all these intervals, all these notes that I'm playing, they have notes, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And after G, we have A again. Does a big circle. And that octave is basically the same exact note that I'm playing, that I'm starting from, an octave higher. It has the same exact name. It doesn't sound exactly the same. One sounds higher than the other, but they have the same names. In this case, it's an E. If I play the open string, that's an E. 12 frets higher is another E. They have the same function, and that's 8. The eighth octave, the eighth interval is called the octave. So basically, that's it in a nutshell. Okay, let's dive in right away with the diagrams. It's going to make more sense. And as we go, if you have questions, don't hesitate to write them down or type them in the chat. But I'm going to show you a diagram that is going to be a canvas that we're going to use throughout this course. So if you had to memorize one thing, it's going to be that diagram. So I don't know if we have that on the screen. There we go. This diagram is played in 3 different areas of the fretboard. On the top one, you see the low note is on the low E string. In this case, I'm starting on the 5th fret, and that's the red note, and it has an R for the root. That's the first note from which we're measuring all the other intervals. That diagram, we're going to memorize it, and it's movable too. So you don't have to start on the 5th fret, but just for the sake of this lesson, we will. And we're going to start with our middle finger on the root, on the 5th string, because I want to get in the habit of using one finger per fret. So in this case, if I start the low E string 5th fret with my middle finger, the next note that we have is on the 7th fret. So in this case, I will use my pinky. So anytime I have a note on the 5th string, I'm going to use my middle finger. Anytime I have a note played on the 6th string, I will use my ring. Anytime I have a note on the 7th, I will use my pinky. And anytime I have a note on the 4th string, I'll use my index. And we do have that on the 5th string, a 4th fret, and that's why I started with the middle finger here. So we're going to memorize that diagram. On the low E string, we have 2 notes, the root and the 2nd. And those notes are played with the middle finger and the pinky. On the next string, we have frets 4, that's index, 5, middle finger, and 7, that's going to be the pinky. And on the 4th string, we have frets 4, 6, 7, and those are going to be played with the index, ring, and pinky. This diagram is very important, so let's play it together. It should kind of sound familiar. It's actually the major scale. And as I'm going, if you look at the diagram, the first note is, again, the root. The second note that I'm playing is a 2nd. So the distance between that red note and the 2nd note is called the 2nd. That's the 2nd interval. The distance between that red note and the 3rd note is a 3rd, a 4th, a 5th, a 6th, a 7th. There's 2 roots here. That's the octave. Same exact note. It sounds different, but these notes have the same function. They're both roots. So if you play, for example, the 4 there, that is on the 5th string, 5th fret, that 4 is only a 4 according to that root. It's the distance between that root and that 4th that makes it a 4th. Okay, makes sense? So that diagram is movable, so I can start on the 7th fret as long as I use the same exact shape. It's going to give me these intervals, this time for the 7th fret. Okay, so I told you last week that we've got intervals that are classified into two main boxes, the major box and the minor box. Every interval can be major or minor. A major interval is wider than a minor interval. So if I have a major third, it's going to be wider than a minor third. To make a major third minor, I'm going to have to move that third 1 fret lower, and that's a minor third. Okay, so that's the case for any intervals. A major interval can become minor by moving the interval 1 fret lower so that you shorten the distance between these two notes. Instead of being like this, it's going to be like that. Major, minor. I've got a major problem, a big problem. I've got a minor problem, a small problem. So that's the main difference. So I told you that any interval can be major or minor. I kind of lied because there's always exceptions, but I didn't quite lie because I did mention that last week, but I didn't want to confuse you. So here's the exception. Every interval can be major or minor except for the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth, or the fourth and the fifth. Those are perfect. They're not major or minor, they're just perfect. So just remember that. And to remember that, those intervals are the two middle intervals. Because if we consider a root, the starting point, we keep going up. So we've got a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh, and the octave. The octave is that eighth interval, which is perfect too, since both notes are exactly the same. An octave is an octave. You don't have a minor octave. It wouldn't be an octave anymore. An octave uses the same exact notes. And if we split that octave right in the middle, so the root, the octave, let's move the root and the octave to keep shortening things. We'd have root octave, second, seventh, third, sixth, fourth, fifth, right in the middle. Those two intervals that are right in the middle are perfect. All the others can be major or minor. So if you had to write down something, that's what you need to write down. The fourth and the fifth are perfect. Here's a trick question. What about the root? Is there such thing as a major root? So feel free to write that on the chat. I can't see the chat, but or think about it in your head. Is there a major root, a minor root? And you should say no, because a root is not an octave, right? A root is the starting point. An octave always involves two notes. So a root is the starting point. Okay. What about major octave? No, that's not a good question either, because an octave is the same exact note, right? Same exact note, played higher, but they have the same function. If it was a minor octave, it wouldn't be an octave anymore. So far, does that make sense? If it doesn't, feel free to write it down and then I can answer that question. But an octave is just an octave. Everything else, all the other intervals that are found between the root and the octave can be major or minor, except for those two exceptions that we just talked about, the fourth and the fifth. Okay? So let's go back to our diagram. On the top one that we're studying here, what we played was anything found between the root and the other root, which is the octave, with a root starting on the low E string. And all these intervals are major, except for the fourth and fifth. Those are perfect. So now you should be able to play any major interval from any fret starting on the low E string. So let's use our diagram here again. We're going to play that again. I've got a root, which is just the root. That's not an interval. A major second, a major third. The fourth is perfect. The fifth is perfect. A major sixth, a major seventh, and a root again, or the octave. And remember, the note itself, so the 7, for example, that's not a seventh on its own. It's got to be measured to this. This is implied, that red note, that bottom red note. It's from that bottom red note that we are measuring the distance between this and this. That makes a major seventh. Okay, so here's a question for you. We're going to consider a low E string 5th fret, just like the diagram. And I want you to visualize, don't necessarily play it on your guitar, but visualize your guitar and play the major sixth and see where that falls on your diagram. And if you just follow the diagram, you know that all these intervals are major or perfect, and you should be playing the 4th string, 4th fret. That's a major sixth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that diagram, that's why it's so important. We're going to use that diagram to figure out all the intervals like that. Now let's move frets. So we're still going to use that high, whoop, wrong side, right here. That diagram. We're still going to use that one. And we're going to consider this time that the root is no longer on the 5th fret, but this time our root is going to be on the 7th fret. We're going to use the same exact shape, but we're moving frets. Okay, same exact shape. And this time, that's the root. Low E string, 7th fret. That's our root. And from there, I want you to play a perfect 5th. You should be playing the 5th string, 9th fret. That's the note that falls on the pinky if you respect that one note per fret. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The distance between this note and this one is a perfect 5th. And if you started playing guitar and started learning rock songs, you've heard of power chords maybe? That shape there, a power chord is just made of a root and a 5th. The 5th is considered a strong octave. It's and that's why it's called a power chord. Powerful, strong chord. Okay, so that's how we're going to use those. So I told you that a major interval can be made minor by shortening the distance of that interval 1 fret. So that's what we're going to do on our diagram. So let's say we want to play a minor third this time. We're going to go back to the root that is indicated on that diagram. Low E string, 5th fret. I want to play a minor third. Well, we know that the diagram lists all the major intervals and the perfect intervals. So let's find our major third. 1, 2, 3. That's a major third. We want to make it minor, 1 fret lower. So instead of the 4th fret, 5th string, 4th fret, go 1 fret lower. And that's a minor third. So keep in mind that this diagram is very condensed here. In that area of the fretboard, it spans across 3 consecutive strings, and it's a narrow area of the fretboard. But keep in mind that on the guitar, you can have the same exact note, so that minor third that was on the 5th string, 3rd fret, can also be played other places of the fretboard. Just play that note, and let's try to find that note on the low E string. There it is. Same exact sound, low E string, 8th fret. So this that we played here, 1 fret lower from the major third, is a minor third. But we also find this note on the low E string, 8th fret. This is also a minor third. It sounds exactly the same. So keep that in mind, because sometimes it's going to be easier to reach that note on the low E string and reorganize your notes so that they're easier to play. And that happens when you're playing scale runs. If I want to play something like this, and I'm kind of messing up. It might be easier to play it this way rather than this way. It sounds exactly the same, but just keep in mind that some notes can be played on multiple strings, multiple frets. It's always important. Okay, so we use that canvas, that diagram, to figure out all the major intervals and the perfect intervals. There is one more thing here. If you look at the diagram, you will see that between the perfect 4th and the perfect 5th of that diagram, so the root is low E string, 5th fret. Perfect 4th is 5th string, 5th fret. Perfect 5th is 5th string, 7th fret. What about that note in between there? There's a note there, right in between the 4th and the 5th. And we know that the 4th is perfect and the 5th is also perfect. So how do we name that note? Well, that's where we're going to talk about subcategories even more. Perfect intervals, they can't be major, they can't be minor, they're perfect, but we can still alter them, change them, with other subcategories. And the words that we're going to use are diminished and augmented. So a diminished interval, an augmented interval, is going to be applied to those perfect intervals, so the 4th and the 5th. The 4th can be three things. It can be a perfect 4th, it can be a diminished 4th, and it can be an augmented 4th. Same with the 5th. The 5th can be diminished, perfect, or augmented. And their placement is perfect, that's the norm. Diminished is smaller than perfect, so you move that perfect interval a fret below. So perfect, diminished, perfect, augmented. You move that one fret higher. So let's give that a try. Let's take the perfect 4th. So we're going to follow our diagram, which lists all the major intervals and the perfect intervals. We're going to go to the 4th. We know that it's perfect. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a perfect 4th. And I want to make that augmented. I'm going to move that perfect 4th one fret higher, or a half step higher. That's an augmented 4th. So the note right in between the 4th and the 5th is an augmented 4th. Now let's try to play an augmented 5th. We're going to follow our diagram. We'll land on the perfect 5th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. To make that 5th augmented, that's one fret higher. And that's an augmented 5th. Now, I want you to, from the same root, low E string 5th fret, I want you to visualize an augmented 4th. And look at that fret, augmented 4th. So you follow your diagram, perfect 4th, make it augmented. Take note of where you're landing. The root is on the low E string 5th fret. So keep that in mind. Now I want you to visualize a diminished 5th. So same thing, follow your diagram to the perfect 5th, make it diminished, one fret lower. And what do you guys notice? Difference between the augmented 4th and the diminished 5th. And you can write it down or you can think about it. And you should notice that these are exactly the same frets, exactly the same string. And that's interesting, right? Two different names for the same exact note. And there's a term for that. That's called enharmonic. Enharmonic, just random fact. Those are enharmonic notes. And that can be useful, but just know that sometimes intervals can have the same name. Some intervals can have the same sound, but different names. Just keep that in mind. We'll run across that at some point. You don't really need to know why now. It doesn't really matter, but just keep that in mind. As long as you understand the logic of how to use that canvas to first find your major and perfect intervals, and then alter those intervals according to your needs. That's what I want you to do. So throughout the week, that's really the goal here, to use that canvas and ask yourself, well, how do I play a minor 6th? First, follow your diagram. You can even play it, and then mentally follow the diagram, and then land on the interval you're targeting, and go from there. Okay. Last week, I told you that the guitar is tuned, well, there's multiple tunings for the guitar, but we're using the standard traditional tuning. And the standard tuning is a little strange because between each string, we have perfect 4ths, except between the 3rd and the 2nd string. Those strings are different. So anytime you have a scale, a chord, a shape that involves strings 3 and 2 at the same time, the shape is going to change a little bit. So if we go back to our diagram, the diagram that we had listed all the intervals between a root and the octaves, between those two red notes. So the top diagram does not involve strings 3 and 2 at the same time, right? So that's going to be our canvas. Now, let's say that we had a root That is this time on the 5th string. So the diagram spans across 3 consecutive strings, okay, to find the intervals between the root and the octave. And if now we move that root to the 5th string, we're going to take the next 3 consecutive strings, so that'll be strings 5, 4, and 3. Those strings do not involve string 3 and 2 at the same time. Therefore, the diagram, the shape, remains exactly the same. So we're going to use the same exact shape there. So that means that you can now find any interval with a root on the 6th string and with a root on the 5th string, because that diagram is not involving strings 3 and 2 at the same time, so the diagram stays the same. So we can use the same exact shape here. And that's why it's not listed there on the diagram. You don't have a diagram that starts with the 5th string, because that diagram is exactly like the top one. And that's what is indicated there. Shape 1 is for the root on strings 6 and 5. So it spans across 3 consecutive strings, doesn't involve strings 3 and 2 together, therefore the shape remains the same. So let's give that a try. I'm going to this time consider a root on the 5th string, 3rd fret. Okay, that's our root, that's our starting point. So hand in position. You're going to visualize that that shape there that is on the top diagram. Same exact shape that can be moved around. But we are on the 5th string, 3rd fret. This shape gives you automatically all the major intervals and the perfect intervals. So that's major 2nd, major 3rd, perfect 4th, perfect 5th, major 6th, major 7th, and the octave. And I'm going to ask you to play or think about or visualize the minor 7th. So first step, you've got your diagram, your canvas. You mentally play that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That 7 is a major 7. Make it minor by moving that 7th 1 fret lower. And you should be playing or should be thinking about the 3rd string, 3rd fret. That's a minor 7. Why? Because what you should have done in your head is follow the diagram. Root 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's a major 7. 3rd string, 4th fret. Make it minor. 3rd string, 3rd fret. That's a minor 7th. The distance between this note and this one is a minor 7th. Let's try another one. This time we're going to consider the root on the 6th string. So that bottom string, that low E string. 10th fret. So 10th fret, hand in position. You've got your canvas. And from there, I want you to play an augmented 5th. So find your 5th, which is perfect in the diagram. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Make it augmented. You should be playing the 5th string, 13th fret. That's an augmented 5th. Because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's a perfect 5th. 1 fret higher, augmented 5th. Okay, great. All right. Now, let's go a little further here. Little visualization exercise. And by the way, you can download those charts if you want to. You can check them out. This lesson is being recorded too. You can refer to it later. But here's the exercise. I'm going to give you a starting point. And we're going to do a little path thing, mystery path, and you'll see if you land on the right note, on the same note. The starting point of this little walk on the fretboard is the low E string, 5th fret. Okay, that's our starting root. So you've got your diagram. You can visualize it, or you can play it if you want. That's the starting point, low E string, 5th fret. From there, I want you to play a major 3rd. So you've got your major 3rd. You should be on whatever. I'm not telling you. Because that major 3rd becomes the new root. Okay, so that becomes the new root. So you might be on a different string. And if you are, that's your new root. And from there, I want you to play a minor 7th. So from that new root, which was the major 3rd of the first one, I I want you to follow the diagram and play a minor seventh. And let's see if we land on the right note. You should be playing right now the 3rd string, 4th fret. So hopefully you got that, and here's why. The starting point was the low E string 5th fret. Follow your diagram because I asked you for the major 3rd. That major 3rd is embedded in that position, 1, 2, 3, because that position lists all the major intervals and the perfect intervals, 1, 2, 3. That note, which is the 5th string 4th fret, becomes the new root, the starting point. So we're going to start our shape from that 5th string 4th fret and ask for a minor 7th. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's the 3rd string 5th fret, but I ask you for a minor 7th, 1 fret lower, and that's the 3rd string 4th fret. Okay, so hopefully you got that. Let's try one more. This time, the starting point is going to be the low E string 9th fret. So low E string 9th fret. You can use the dots here. It's that one right there. And that's going to be the starting point. And from that note, I would like you to play an augmented 4th. So follow the diagram. Starting point is the low E string 9th fret. And that augmented 4th is going to be the starting point of a new position. That becomes your new root. And from there, we'd like you to play a major 3rd. So wherever you're landing there is the landing note, and you should be playing the 4th string 9th fret. So here's why. The starting point was low E string 9th fret. I asked you for an augmented 4th, so 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a perfect 4th. Make it augmented, 1 fret higher. That's the 5th string 10th fret. And from there, I ask you a major 3rd, so that becomes a new root. So you follow your diagram, 1, 2, 3. That's a major interval automatically because the diagram lists the major intervals and the perfect intervals. And you should be playing the 4th string, 9th fret. Now here's a bonus question. That note that you're playing, 4th string, 9th fret, is an interval according to the very starting point, the starting root, which was the low E string 9th fret. What is that interval? In other words, what's that interval between the root on the low E string 9th fret and the note that is on the 4th string 9th fret? What is that? And you should be thinking about the minor 7th. So that note, that shape is not found in the canvas. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's not found in there, but it is found 1 fret below the major 7th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Therefore, it's a minor 7th. Okay. I'll take a short break to see if there's any pressing questions. Feel free to ask if there's anything relevant to this. And just remember your shape, and we'll take this first question.
Okay, this is all we have for the moment.
Okay.
On the first diagram, if you scale down to fret 3 on string 6, is that also a 2nd?
So on the first diagram, scale down to fret 3 on the 6th string. Yeah, so I think I know what you're talking about. On the first diagram, which had the root on the low E string 5th fret, and if I scale down, so if I move that root 2 frets below, the distance between this note and this note is a major 2nd. So 3rd fret, that is the same shape as a major 2nd. So if I understood your question correctly, the answer is yes. You got it. No questions mean that it makes sense, hopefully.
Well, we did get not really a question so much as a, I'll just read it because I didn't get it into my form yet.
Okay.
I'm having a hard time understanding how to get to the notes he wants us to find based on the root. So I don't know if we can spend a little more time on that maybe.
Yeah. And did that question just come in?
Yeah.
Okay. So really, as long as you follow your canvas, that shape, and maybe it's a little bit fast, but rewatch the video, because once you have that shape really memorized, within that shape, you're playing 8 notes, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The first note is the root, the starting point. All the other notes that you're playing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, are major intervals or perfect intervals. So if I ask you for a major seventh, you play the 7th note, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's a major 7. If you want to make it minor, just move that 7 1 fret lower. That'll become a minor 7. So it's all in the shape. And you might be a little confused because I moved that shape around. I didn't start on the same fret as it's notated here. But if you spend time memorizing that shape correctly, you can easily, this is called transposing, starting it from a different fret, so higher on the fretboard, same exact shape. And that shape will list all the major intervals and the perfect intervals. And then you change those intervals according to what I'm asking you. So if I ask you for a minor interval, well, you've got to find that major interval first, which is embedded in that shape. So if I ask for a minor third, find the major third first. 1, 2, 3. Make it minor by moving that third 1 fret lower. If you look at your guitar from your perspective, on the left side, 1 fret. And that's your minor third. But rewatch this lesson. I'm going a little fast here, but if you rewatch it, it's definitely going to make sense. And I recommend that you print out those shapes too.
We have had a couple more that are related that should be pretty quick to clarify.
Yeah.
Is the diminished fourth the same as a perfect third?
Good question. There's no such thing as perfect third. The only perfect intervals are 4th and 5th. Third is major or minor. But the diminished fourth is the same as the major third. So then that's what you meant, I'm sure. So if you take your diagram, you play a diminished fourth. So the diagram will list the perfect fourth. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a perfect fourth. Diminished fourth is 1 fret lower. And you're landing on the same exact fret as the major third. So yes, diminished fourth and major third are exactly the same. Those are called, the term that I mentioned before, enharmonic notes. Yep.
Okay, cool. One other quick one here. Do these rules apply in all scenarios in every key and every scale?
Yep, and that's the beauty of this. Theory is not complicated. If you use that canvas, you can analyze anything you want, any piece of music. Same exact rules all the time. So that's the cool thing with this. Great. Okay, so let's go back to this weird guitar tuning thing where all strings are tuned a perfect fourth apart, except for the second and the third. So anytime you have a shape that involves strings 3 and 2 together, the shape's going to change. So now let's say that we have a root on the 4th string this time. So remember, the shape uses 3 consecutive strings. So to list the octave, we'll have, let's consider the 5th fret, 4th string. We'll have strings 4, 3, and 2. So 3 and 2 are together. The shape is going to change. So that's a new shape to learn. And that's shape number 2. It's very similar to the first one. The difference is on that 3rd string, or that last string that you're playing. In this case, the 2nd string. So we've got to memorize that shape. And if we have a root on the 4th string, 5th fret, so far, so it's exactly the same. Root, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. Exactly the same shape as we had in shape 1. But now we're going to change slightly, and we've got to shift the string 1 fret higher. So that shape is going to be something you need to memorize. It's very close. If you compare both, you see that pretty much all the same. There's just a difference when you're shifting between the 3rd and the 2nd string. You've got to shift 1 fret higher. Let's use that shape a little bit. Consider the root on the 4th string, 5th fret, just like the diagram for shape number 2. It's this. I can't do it. Thought it would be cool to do it, but maybe this one right there. Shape number 2, I want you to play a minor 3rd. So you follow your shape. Within that shape, you've got all the major intervals in the perfect, which are fourth and fifth. A minor third, so first find your major third. 1, 2, 3, that's your major third. Make it minor, one fret lower. So instead of being on the third string, fourth fret, 1, 2, 3, right there, it's going to be on the third string, third fret. That's a minor third. Just for fun, let's say that we want to play that minor third somewhere on the same string as the root was. So just use your ear to find this minor third sound somewhere on the fourth string. There it is. You might have to fish around a little bit, but that might be useful if you're playing a chord and you want to add a particular interval, like a third, for example, but the fingering is too weird, so sometimes you might have to move things around on the fretboard like that. So just keep that in mind. Notes can be played on multiple areas of the fretboard, same exact notes. Okay, let's use the same diagram, and this time I want you to play a minor sixth. So the root is on the fourth string, fifth fret. A minor sixth is not built in the diagram right away, so you got to find your major sixth, which is built in, so follow the diagram. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Make it minor by moving it a fret lower. And you should be playing the second string, fourth fret. Because the diagram lists all the major intervals in the perfect, so follow it until you get the sixth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's the second string, fifth fret. One fret lower is the second string, fourth fret. And that's your minor sixth. Okay. Really quick, we're going to look at that third shape, which is again different because the third shape lists the intervals with a root on the third string. And the third string, if we take the next three strings, we will have string 3 and 2 together at the same time. So the shape is going to change slightly. And you've got a new shape here to learn for all the intervals that are starting on that third string. And here's that shape. I'll consider a root on the third string, fifth fret. We've got on the third string frets 5, 7 for the root and the major second. On the next string we have frets 5, 6, 8 for the third, perfect fourth, and perfect fifth. And on the first string we have frets 5, 7, 8 for the sixth, major seventh, and octave or root. So that shape altogether. So within that shape, let's say that I want to play a diminished fifth. So follow the shape until you get the perfect fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Make it diminished, one fret lower. You should be playing the second string, seventh fret. Because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's your perfect fifth. Make it diminished, one fret lower. And that is the second string, seventh fret. So these three shapes are the only shapes you need to memorize to understand music theory, really. They're going to list everything. So we're going to do the same exercise that we did, that pathway. Like a landing note will become a new root and so forth. And we're going to try to use the proper shapes depending on where your root is. And this is going to be a mental exercise. The starting point is going to be the low E string, fifth fret. So low E string is the sixth string. Therefore, you're going to use that first shape. And as we go, you might need to shift your shape. So let's see if we can do this right. I'm going to give you a series of 3 intervals. The first starting point, like I said, is the sixth string, fifth fret. From there, I would like you to play a perfect fifth. So if I say perfect, automatically you should think, well, that is embedded in that shape. So you play your perfect fifth. You should be landing on something. And that something becomes the new root. So starting point, low E string, sixth string, fifth fret. Your perfect fifth. So visualize that or play it, whatever you want to do, or look on the screen. That becomes your new root. So you might be on a different string than the sixth string. And if you are, which shape are you going to use? Shape 1 which is for string 6 and 5, shape 2 for string 4, or shape 3 for string 3. So now that you determine that perfect fifth is the starting point of a new shape, and from there I'd like you to play a major third. So follow your shape, 1, 2, 3, major third, that's embedded in there. That becomes your new root. So which string are you on? Answer that question and find the corresponding diagram. And from there, that becomes your new root. I would like you to play let's see, where was I? Okay, I would like you to play a perfect fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And your landing note should be, I kind of forgot the intervals that I listed. Let's see. We started with, what did we start with? Our perfect fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Major third, perfect fifth. I believe you should be on the third string, 8th fret. I should have written those down. But let's do it together. And even if I didn't respect those intervals, as long as you understand the thought process, that's the important thing. We had a starting shape. The root was on the low E string, 5th fret. I ask you for a perfect fifth. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That becomes the new root. And that 5, that fifth, is on the 5th string, 7th fret. That's the new root. So which shape are we going to use? Shape 1, 2, or 3? We're going to use shape 1 because the root is on the 5th string, so it's the same exact shape. From there, I ask you a major third. So 1, 2, 3. Major third right there. That becomes the new root, and that's on the 4th string. 4th string, 6th fret. New root, therefore new diagram, because that's the root is on string number 4, which is shape number 2. And I ask you for a perfect fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that is the 3rd string, 8th fret. It's a lot of wording, a lot of talk, but if you rewatch this video and you follow the thought process, it's really simple. As long as you've got those 3 shapes down and you know which shape to use depending on the string you're starting from, that's the goal. So that's basically what I had for you today. A few clarifications. Let's say that we had a root that started on the 2nd string this time. Does the 2nd string involve strings 3 and 2 together? No. Therefore, you're going to use the first shape that I gave you. Now, you can't you can't use the same exact shape because we're running out of strings there. But you can list the 1, the root, 2, 3, 4, 5. And go from there. Another point that I wanted to talk about. What's the point of all this? Why would we do all that? Well, music theory is about matching the elements. It's just like a puzzle, but I'm not talking about the adult puzzles. I'm talking about the kids' puzzles, your first puzzles, where you have pre-cut shapes, and you've got to match those pieces to the pre-cut shapes. That's what music theory is. If you're playing over a backing track, the backing track is that board with the pre-cut shapes. And then you've got to match the corresponding shape to those pre-cut shapes. And basically, if you've got a chord is a series of intervals. That's your shape. You've got to pick from all the different intervals that you know, or music elements that you know, chords, scales, and so forth, to match that pre-cut shape. Let me give you an example. Let's say that we have a chord that is something like a power chord. We mentioned that earlier. That's what we have. Low E string is the root, and then we've got this note. Well, you visualize your shape. You know that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's found in your shape. So it's a major or a perfect interval. It's going to be a perfect. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That means that if you had a backing track just with this, just these 2 notes, and you want to play a solo, Well, two notes are already given to you. The root, which is the low E string 5th fret. It happens to be an A, but you don't even need to know that. And a perfect 5th. If you want to play notes that fit that, you're going to play a root and a perfect 5th. Now, if you only played a solo with these two notes, if you got the backing track and your solo, with whatever rhythm element, it's going to be very boring, but it's going to work. We need more notes. So which notes are we going to use? Well, you look at the chord. If the chord only gives you a root and a perfect 5th, no other intervals, you fill in the blanks however you want. So a second, in this case, could be major. You could play that. That would work. But it could be minor too. That would work as long as the intervals are not given to you by the backing track or the chord or the rhythm section. You pick whatever you want. So in this case, if we had a root and a 5th, we could use, let's say that we're gonna make a scale that has only major intervals and perfect intervals. Well, that's the shape actually. So you got the root, a major 2nd, major 3rd, perfect 4th, perfect 5th. I couldn't play a diminished 5th there because it's given already. That 5th is given to me by the chord, major 6th and major 7. And so if I play a solo, I could play these notes. That works. Because I respected the intervals. Now, let's try another scale. Let's say that instead of using major intervals and perfect intervals, I'm only going to use minor intervals and perfect if I have to, because we know that the 4th and 5th are neither major or minor. They're just perfect. Well, I've got my root. That's given to me. I can't play a different root. Well, I can, but if I do, it's going to clash with that root. So I've got to match the elements. The root is given, low E string 5th fret. I said that I was going to make up a scale with only minor intervals and perfect intervals. Well, my second is no longer going to be major, but minor. The third, I'm going to make it minor. So I've got a minor 2nd, a minor 3rd. Instead of playing that 3rd here, I'm going to play it right here, because it's going to be easier. And that's one of the uses of playing a note somewhere else on the fretboard for facility, to facilitate things. So I've got a root, minor 2nd, minor 3rd. The 4th, I'm going to leave it perfect. What about the 5th? Well, I don't really have a choice if I want to be melodic. I'm going to respect what's given to me by this chord. I'm going to play a perfect 5th. So far, I've got these notes. The 6th, I'm going to make it minor. Why not? I can, because I decided to only use minor intervals or perfect. Again, this note, I'm going to move it to the 5th string. It's going to be easier to play. There it is, same sound. Therefore, that's a minor 6th. And the major, the 7th, I'm also going to make minor. So this time, this is the scale that I made up. And that scale is going to sound different than the previous one I had. But it's also going to work. Both are going to work as well. They're going to give you a different color over this simple chord that is made of a root and a 5th. Why? Because those two scales respect the elements of my chord. The first one is root, major 2nd, major 3rd, perfect 4th, perfect 5th, major 6th, major 7th, over a chord that is a root and a 5th. The second scale is root, minor 2nd, minor 3rd, perfect 4th, perfect 5th, minor 6th, and minor 7th, over a chord that has a root and a 5th. Both are going to work. Let's hear these one after the other. The first one is going to have a major feel, kind of a happier feel. The second, a little bit sadder, minor feel. And here's the difference. Major, next one that also works. And the other one they both work, right? So that's why it's important to know your intervals. How are we doing on time?
We're right at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock.
Great.
We have a handful of questions if you would.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, this one, Edge EM asked a while ago. Dave, I downloaded a song with just chord letters, no diagram. What is a B chord?
Good question. So we'll get a lot more into chords hopefully later in the lesson, but just for info, a B chord, or a chord that just has the letter, that's it, is a major chord made of a root, major third, that's what determines the nature of the chord, and a perfect fifth, sometimes if you want to have more strength to it. So there's several ways to playing that, but you could play it with a bar if you want, the root on the low E string, 7th fret. And if you know your F chord, it's exactly the same shape, but you move it to the 7th fret. And the application here is if you had a chord made of a root, major third, perfect fifth, which are kind of organized differently for fingering purposes, you would use a scale that respects those elements of root, major third, and perfect fifth. The second is not mentioned in that chord, so you could play a major second or a minor second. It doesn't matter. Here's the difference. Here's with a major second. Minor second. Both work, right? Because I respected the elements. Next.
Okay. Using the exercise, using the third and the shapes, is that for adding this? Sorry,
No problem.
This
Yeah.
question's the way it's worded is a little confusing, I think. So I don't know if you want to look at that and see if it makes any sense to you.
Let's see. So using the exercise, using the third and the shapes, is that for adding the second interval from the third? You're adding the 5V or
Yeah,
7?
I think he probably means the 5.
Okay. Yes. I think the answer is a yes. I'm not sure I understand the question. If you want to clarify.
I think I forgot I had asked him to clarify, and I don't think he ever did.
Okay.
So let's move on. I know that you said that the shapes are movable, but could you talk a little bit about how those shapes would be applied to open string positions?
Yeah, great question too. That's where you're going to have to use your ear. Let's take a practical example. Let's take a G major chord, for example. Those are the first chords that you learn. A G major in the open position here. We're going to consider that lowest note, the bass, to be the root. It happens to be a G, so that's why it's a G chord. The next note that we have here in that fingering, I'm going to actually name those frets really quick for reference. From the 6th string to the 1st string, we have frets 3, 2, 0, open, 0 again, and 3. So the root is this time on the low E string, the 6th string, 3rd fret. Follow your shape and see if you have that next note, which is on the 5th string, 2nd fret, and we do. 1, 2, 3. That's a major third. Therefore, it's a major chord. The next note we have is open. We don't have that note in our shape. We don't have it found in that shape. But if we play the note, so we're on the 4th string, open string, let's see if we can play that sound, that note, somewhere else on the fretboard. Maybe on the 5th string. And we do have it on the 5th string, 5th fret. Same exact sound. So that note is found in the shape 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's a perfect fifth. So what you would do when you're dealing with open strings is try to find that sound somewhere else on the fretboard closer to the zone that you're using to analyze things and see what it is. If it's embedded in the shape directly, it's either a major or a perfect interval. If it's not, find the closest interval and see if that's a minor or diminished or augmented or an octave maybe. So that's how you just use your ear. And as you go, you'll be able to, once you memorize those shapes, you can expand a little bit and try to find an alternative to that interval that is not embedded but somewhere else. It'll be useful.
Okay. The first shape is A, B, C sharp, D, E, etc. Can we assume that those chords with those names would work in that progression?
Yes. So yeah, if you actually name the notes from that first shape, for example, those 7 notes, well, there are 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But that 8 is the octave. So same exact note as the starting one. So really we have 7 different notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp would be the starting notes of 7 different chords. Now you need to know what type of chords because they could be minor, major, diminished, and that's coming up in a future lesson. But yes, these are the starting points of chords that would work in that key. If you find, let's say, a chord that starts with a C instead of a C sharp, that's a modulation. That's a change of key, and we'll deal with that. I think it's the 8th lesson or the 7th. But yeah, great observation.
Can we assume that chords would work? Oh, sorry. I think
No problem.
must have copied the wrong question on there. Let me go to the next one, and I'll find that question from Hangman
Okay.
of Love.
It sounds like that question is the same answer as the previous one.
I think I just copied the wrong question, so that was my bad.
No problem.
So you don't use fifth, augmented, or diminished because perfect fifth is in the power chord?
Yep, exactly. Now I could use non-matching elements. So if we had that power chord with a root and a perfect fifth, and I decided to use a scale with a diminished fifth, that note would clash with the perfect fifth, which is allowed, but it's going to be tensed. And if you're going after a tensed sound, a dissonant sound, you can do it. But just know that if you do that, it's not going to be the most pleasing to most people. Some people are not going to like it. But if you want to write something that is really making sense, you've got to respect the elements.
Okay, here I found the correct question. For the last one, when playing the perfect fifth diminished, is it the same thing as saying minor fifth?
It's a good question. No, minor fifth really doesn't exist. But some people talk about minor fifth. And I understand what they mean, but try really to get in the habit of not calling it minor fifth or major fifth, because that will create problems down the road, because you won't really be able to differentiate, perfect from diminished from augmented. So no, minor fifth does not exist. Doesn't exist.
Okay, that's all the questions we have at the moment.
Great. I hope this made sense, and I really encourage you to rewatch this video, learn these 3 shapes. Those are going to be fundamental for anything you do. Really, if you had to memorize one thing, this is it. From these 3 different canvases, 3 because they're starting on different strings, you can play any interval, you can analyze anything, any chord that you have, you can analyze with that shape. And just do it. Practice that this week. And next week, we're going to use that again. I'm going to hope that you'll have those memorized because we're not going to spend too much time on it. And if you have questions during the week, write them down. We'll take a few minutes at the beginning of next week's session just to cover those. And rewatch session 1 too, because you might have more more solid knowledge after watching these 2 sessions. Just take those 2 hours to rewatch them. It's really going to make a difference in your understanding of music theory. It's not complicated stuff, but it's just little simple steps that all made together create the knowledge of what this big, scary topic can be, but it really doesn't have to be scary. That's it for today. Thanks everyone for joining us. Look forward to next Monday, same time, same place, and we'll just continue. We'll build on what we've talked about, and looking forward to seeing you then. Thanks so much.